We're just beginning to understand this ability of our mind or vibes to regulate our genes. So if we just start from the basic understanding that, our genes are the blueprint of our body, this is what our physical manifestation comes from. I think that the shift that I'd like to help catalyze, and this has been ongoing, is that we're not just the puppets of our genes. We are actually in collaboration with our genes. Gene expression is a constant, ongoing, dynamic process. There's been a ton of research showing how external forces impact gene expression, but I think the new frontier is understanding how internal forces, basically our mental, our attention, our intention, our internal vibes, our subconscious vibes, are impacting the regulations of genes constantly. And this is happening whether we know it or not.
Every so often, a conversation reminds us that science is just scratching the surface insofar as reaching beyond into the unknown. And the fact is, Dr. Garrett Yount is one of those rare scientists who has spent his career walking the tightrope between the measurable and the mysterious, studying how consciousness, intention, and subtle energy ripple through our biology. His work at the Institute of Noetic Sciences invites us to look deeper, not only at the data, but at the dialogue between mind and molecule. In this episode of the DNA of Things, we explore the hidden thread that weaves through everything, the pulse that links thought to healing, coherence to connection, and awareness to evolution. This is more than a conversation about science. It's an invitation to listen differently to the field within and around us. Dr. Garrett Yount reframes transhumanism through applied psychobiology. Author of Why Vibes Matter, he now expands that work into the energy of people, places, and spaces. This is a course that pairs grounded science with experimental practice. Now, Garrett argues that the most immediate democratic path to human enhancement lies in the epigenetic modulation. So that's leveraging environment, attention, and embodied practices to influence RNA expression and physiology without rewriting the genome. His approach is pragmatic and skeptical in equal measure. He emphasizes measurable outcomes, ethical guardrails, and the limits of biological reprogramming. So here we are today on the DNA of Things with Garrett, where we explore where intention meets biology, that is the mechanisms, the evidence, and the ethical frame for using consciousness as a tool for change. So Garrett brings research, pedagogy, and real experiments that invite clinicians, coaches, and curious citizens to test whether waking latent biology is possible and what it means to human flourishing. So, that was a long intro. Dr. Garrett Yount, welcome back to the DNA of Things.
Thanks, Jeremy. Great to be back.
Last time when we had this conversation, we talked a little bit about the Institute of Noetic Science. I thought maybe, before we dive in, to the course that you're working on, essentially disseminating through ions, the energy of people, places, and spaces, it'd be great to get, a quick recap of how you came to be there and, where is there? Because every time I hear the story, I am reinvigorated, by the, let's say, alternate ways of knowing that seem to come out of the Institute of Noetic Science. So could you tell us, what is ions and how did you come to be there, at the risk of repeating yourself?
Sure. Ions was founded about 51 years ago by Edgar Mitchell, who was the sixth man to walk on the moon, so an astronaut. He was headed back to Earth, looking at Earth from space, and had this epiphany that science and spirituality ought to be merged. So he formed the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and we're a ragtag team of scientists that come out of academia and to apply scientific methods to explore consciousness, awareness, energy, and reality. So we try to be super scientific, yet open-minded. So I'm really lucky to be here. Actually came this way via my interest in lucid dreaming. I was at a lucid dreaming conference when I was in grad school, and one of the grandfathers of parapsychology, Stanley Krippner, gave a talk. I said, "Hey, I'm a molecular biologist. I want to study consciousness." And he said, "You should come out to San Francisco. You're going to find your people out there." So that's what kind of headed me in that direction. Of course, this was about 30 years ago. And it's kind of just grown from there. The program has grown a bit as well. We also have an education department and memberships. So that the education department is actually how we're making this course.
Amazing. So how long have you been there now?
Oh gosh, been officially on board maybe just 10 years. So I've been
Wow.
in
Okay.
cahoots with them ever since I first came out here 30 years ago.
Okay. So 30 years of knowing, 10 years of integration. And when you started, was there an education program?
Yeah, there was a membership program. Actually, there was no biology. Dean Radin was the chief scientist that really only doing physics experiments. And that's what I did while at UCSF. I just collaborated with Dean Radin, brought in Qigong masters to see if we could see external Qigong influencing cells in petri dishes. It's actually, some of that work was depicted in Dan Brown's book, The Lost Symbol, a few years back, where his protagonist is an amalgamation of all the scientists. And interestingly, he just published another book called The Secret of Secrets, just like last month, which is a follow-up. The same protagonist. He talks about ions. He mentioned this is a real institute. So it's a real blessing that Dan Brown likes us and actually talks about us in real life to normal people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's something to the power of storytelling, to make science actionable, certainly relatable, at least, right? I mean, I can say that I didn't really warm up to science in university, which is odd because, my PhD, like you, is in molecular biology, biochemistry. I didn't really warm up to it until I started to learn about, like the philosophers,
Yeah.
right? Like particularly in, mathematics, like once you start to hear about, their lives, you learn about Sir Isaac Newton, you start to learn about Sir Charles Darwin, you learn about their motivations, you learn about their methodologies, you learn about, well, I mean, to hit it on the nose, to learn about the energy of these people, places, and spaces, it really, kind of brings the cold calculations to life, at least for me. It was hard for me to really get interested in biological experimentation until you kind of learn about the motives of, say, like Banton and Best, and studying discovering or working to discover the cure for insulin, and what a mess that was because they didn't write their protocols down and they had to, kind of rework it and get back to beginning again with the end in mind. And it really kind of showed to me how messy science actually was, despite getting this beautiful, pristine paper that,
Yeah.
is, I suppose, good to memorialize the result. But for me, context is if content is king, context is the kingdom. Is at least that's kind of the emotional intuit for me. And last little bit is, if I had my wish as a child, I would have been writing adventure books. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
it was just, our Mulrooney government, Canadian government at the time, wanted children to go into math and science. So they sent around young, good-looking people to tell young children to do math and science. And I was like, but I like writing. Like, but you need to do math and science. And so here's my protest, and this is how I'll do math and science. And I guess it's no accident that I chose the kind of mentors that I did, like Ford Doolittle, who started as a scientist, switched over to philosopher. So the power of the question and the power of the paradigm and its limitations. And so here you are, challenging that. And, and I don't think that was easy, right? Because you had to leap from the so-called traditional way of doing science, whatever that is, to this ragtag group of individuals. I liken it to, like, I don't know if you'd call it like misfits, because I don't think that does the term justice, but there certainly was a moment where you were like, hey, I'm going to do this thing at Ions, which is not the obvious path. What was that decision like?
Yeah. Well, I just want to mention about the context and philosophy because it just made me remember that in the first draft of my PhD thesis, the first chapter was all about the philosophical positioning of the scientific method, because the scientific method is one way of knowing. And
Right.
it's something that I think is often forgotten. Actually, so the first thing that my thesis committee made me do was just drop that chapter. They didn't want to hear that. So that was
Mm.
not part of this endeavor. But so kind of came out of that more into the minored in philosophy. I was super interested in theory of knowledge. So this scientific method is one application, super powerful, of course, but it is, I think, important to remember this is one way of seeing the world, one way of building this reality around us. So I
Mhm.
already kind of had that, lose a boundary around the way I approached it. And
Mhm.
then really what drove me in this direction, though, were personal experiences of powers of the mind that were not being talked about by the science. And so
Mhm.
I had this drive to study that, to understand it. So I really appreciate the scientific method and I understand the power of it. And I just saw these other aspects of the human mind that were basically being just not spoken about and certainly not studied systematically. So that's
Mhm.
kind of what led me to go up to this Stanley Krippner, because he was talking about shamanism and so that's it. Yeah, here are these people out here who do want to study these things. And so that's what, yeah, it was really personal experiences. I would, the most notable one is kind of referred to as clairvoyance, just this
Mhm.
ability to kind of spontaneously see other locations. And I said, what is this about?
Mhm.
Read all kinds of, when I was younger, Asian philosophy. Of course, they talk about the theory of mind in Asia was much, much more expansive than what was within the mere materialistic paradigm at the time. So I was just fascinated by all that and fortunate enough to find this crew out here in California that wanted to look at it scientifically.
And so you found your people, basically.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then inadvertently, that I think got you to the book that you wanted to write. Like maybe the seeds of it were in that chapter of your PhD, and it's brought to light into why vibes matter. And I know that we have an episode previously where we dive into that, at length, and I'll attach it to this for those who are interested in revisiting it or seeing it for the first time. But maybe just kind of a quick overview of, I mean, that might be a difficult ask. I mean, it's been a year since I've looked at it deeply. I mean, I scanned it before a call, but there were many things that there are many practical things in that book also, in addition to like kind of the paradigm of, well, the different levels of consciousness that you outline. And maybe a quick refresher there could help our discussion. And because ultimately I know that there's more than a discussion needed, which is why the course exists. So maybe if you could, you know give the listeners an overview of what you found in writing that book, and then we might springboard into how that book comes alive in the course.
Yeah. I think the goal of the book was to bring this idea of vibes into context. It's used in so many different ways. People talk about vibes. It's a very common thing used in media and advertising as well. So there's a lot of things that are kind of just generally thought about vibes that some of it's got science behind it and some of it doesn't. So that was kind of the primary goal of the book, is just to give a lay of the land of vibes. That's where we talk about different levels of mind so that we could talk about different types of vibes, subconscious vibes, conscious vibes, and we would go into super conscious vibes. So it's meant to give kind of a sober look at it, both exposing some of the common fallacies as well as some of the really, really intriguing science behind what we know, that the importance of these things, how it impacts our behaviors. And then the book does give experiential practices for people to feel their own vibes. And that's really what the course does, is really focus in on that. It also has the context of what the science is behind these things. But the course is really for beginners who want to experience them, experience their lives, know how to regulate them. So it's taking walks through some of the experiences that overlap with the book, and some of them are new. It's really for beginners who want to have a kind of a scientific, rational approach to exploring the energies of their body.
Right. And so like that's the, the interesting, point for me is that I remember from our first conversation. It's like, okay, well, here's the scientific way of quantifying the supernatural, and maybe supernatural isn't the right word, actually. Maybe these things are quite natural, but they are, I mean, they've gone into the background, right? It's like, selective listening versus selective silencing, selective seeing versus, selective omission, right? And I think that's the thing that we don't realize we're doing all the time is like to complete a task, for example. Well, I mean, just as simply as driving to work in the morning, it's like you reduce. I mean, the brain's amazing, right? It's trying to conserve energy, so it's like, well, what's the most limited amount of energy that I need to expend from as far as cognition is concerned, driving to and from work? And you do it enough times. I mean, people I think say this all the time, like, I don't even know how I got here, right?
Yeah.
And I think what's the pretty amazing thing about the brain is it gets to that selective omission over time. I know there's probably a better term scientifically for it that you can correct me on, but the point is so many other things go unnoticed, right? Because you've decided on the outcome that you want. And that might be the necessary outcome, especially if it's an urgent thing. Well, I mean, heck, going to work is pretty urgent. You've got to secure a livelihood, right? So maybe that's the first thing on our lizard brain mind. If we're in that kind of scarcity mode, is this is the only thing that matters. And so it is a great survival instinct. And so that having been said, we're talking on this kind of like talking about thematically on this transhumanism, right? So like, how are we becoming more than our lizard brain? And things that we've talked about, at length offline are, some of kind of the hard, more mechanistic, destructive, very, I would say beyond provocative. I would say ethically and morally questionable things like, the gene editing, the, uploading your consciousness to a machine, the plugging a neural link, a chip in your brain, basically having everything that you see under meta glasses, everything recording, leveraging an AI as your co-pilot, effectively outsourcing a lot of our decision making to machines. And to me, the thing that I think about is, okay, well, sure, there are some things that I would love to have outsourced. Like I took out the garbage this morning. I'd love to have a robot do that, maybe. But would I have a robot talk to my daughter who's trying to navigate her emotions for the first time, when she's 2 and she's moving into that development? The robot might actually have better algorithms for me. And so, like, there might be a way to use it as a manual, but would I fully delegate my role of father in that scenario? And so that just to me is like, that's the human question. And I mean, again, you can even push that further. It's like, well, if you were any kind of father, you'd be a little more objective in terms of how you treat. So, but I don't know, because one of the things we're talking about is being in relationship, and that's what you described, right? Is being in relationship with the people, places, and spaces. And so I think that is the thing that is uniquely human so far. And so then understanding that relationship as it relates to something objective and measurable, calling it vibes, but actually seeing how intention can change gene expression and prolong gene expression, like epigenetics. And so, like, let's talk a little bit about how you've observed that and how that has become the foundation for what you're doing today.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize what you were alluding to. You're talking about the aspect of transhumanism, which is about technology augmenting, and we're kind of becoming because we're reaching outward to this technology.
Uh-huh.
I want to talk with you today more the opposite direction, just going inward, because I believe there's incredibly untapped powers of humanity. We can be transhuman, but from the inside. And your question, the answer, just basically the tip of the iceberg. We're just beginning to understand this ability of our mind or vibes to regulate our genes. So if we just start from the basic understanding that, that our genes are the blueprint of our body. This is what our physical manifestation comes from. I think that the shift that I'd like to help catalyze, and this has been ongoing, is that, we're not just the puppets of our genes. We are actually in collaboration with our genes. So, as I'm sure everybody listening to your podcast knows, gene expression is a constant, ongoing, dynamic process. There's been a ton of research showing how external forces impact gene expression. But I think the new frontier is understanding how internal forces, basically our mental, our attention, our intention, our internal vibes, our subconscious vibes, are impacting the regulations of genes constantly. And this is happening whether we know it or not, right? Some of it, and that's kind of what I hope we explore in today, is the importance of thinking about that and curating who are you letting program your biology. I think that, and so that basically getting in touch with the energy of people, places, and spaces, but tuning into that is going to then open up the possibility to be a better curator of this dynamic interplay between your internal experience and our genome, and ultimately our physical manifestation, our experience in the world.
I mean, when we hear it like that, it sounds, far out. But to use your language, it's much more far in than we thought. So I mean, even using like, well, change the environment. So for example, if I move closer to the equator, we get more vitamin D, right? And that's a biochemical change in terms of, in the end, how that interaction, with the UV, with the light, leads to the production of the vitamin D, like it's basically endogenous versus supplementation, in the winter. I mean, again, it's taking a pill, but now you changed the profile, right? And I mean, even when we eat different foods, I've, maintained this for the longest time. If I was to go and switch out from, I don't know, let's just say a normal Western diet, heavily enriched for carbohydrates and processed foods. I mean, which, like, your body is perfectly balanced to express the enzymes to degrade those kinds of macronutrients, to detoxify those toxins, et cetera. But then if you go and you switch it out, there's a lag insofar as a new transcription profile necessarily. So say if I was going to go ketogenic, right? It's like, well, now I don't need all these carbohydrate metabolizing genes, so I'm going to turn that off. And I'm going to turn on, the fat metabolizing genes, for example, right? And so there's this kind of molecular switching. It's like a molecular workout that happens, and this kind of this lag in efficiency. Like at first, you're not getting any energy because you're throwing the food in, and it's not primed to digest that, right? But so those are really simple examples of just changing where you are in space, and your access to the sun, or just putting food in your body. But there are levels, far beyond this, or there are stimuli that are less obvious, seemingly intangible, but the evidence exists. I'm sure we've talked about this before, like the residual transcriptional profiles from children who were conceived during the Dutch hunger famine for generations beyond the exposure to the atrocities of violence, war, scarcity of food. 2-3 generations into the future, you see methylation patterns associated with paranoid schizophrenia, associated with the behavior of paranoid schizophrenia and, obesity. Because guess what? It makes sense in times of war to be, paranoid, or in times of scarcity to store food, right? And so there's this kind of more a level much more subtle of programming, as you say, that could be stuff that you see on social media, right? Stuff that our health practitioners or authorities who are, providing suggestions, maybe for the greater good in mind, but like, what is that narrative that we're blindly accepting, and should we? Like, so I think there is a point where we do have to delegate what story we going to listen to, but then at a certain point you become a little more discerning and critical, and you're like, well, wait a minute, that story is actually not serving me anymore. Like,
Right.
Santa Claus isn't real. It got me excited and, you know got my behavior right when I was 5 or 6, but like, really, no, Santa Claus isn't real. So okay, as far as the stories we tell ourselves, it sounds to me like you're, through this course, showing people how to empower themselves to be proactive with the scripts that they choose. And am I right in assuming that?
Yeah. Yeah. And getting feedback from their own body and own
Right.
experience. Right.
Right.
So some of the early work, experimental work that kind of builds the science behind this, the earliest stuff that I think is the most compelling is the placebo research. And my favorite one, it was Zubieta, 2005, Journal of Neuroscience, basically showing that placebo, so they were injecting, I think, salt water into the jaws of men and then giving them a pill that was either an opiate or not, but they thought it was an opiate. And they showed that the brain actually, with the placebo, would actually produce endogenous opioids, right? And so this receptor upregulation, this is basically an, an epigenetic change. This is a gene regulation happening as a result of this belief. So that was, I think, when I got excited about that, because like, okay, this is actually direct demonstration of what it's pretty obvious happens, but this shows a gene expression change related only to a mental event. There's lots of really cool stuff before that, like laughter, like they're showing people watching a movie laughing and they show upregulation genes, which I love. But there's a lot of going on of that. There's this rhythmic contraction of the diaphragm muscles that could change gene expression. But that placebo experiment, I thought, was one of the best early ones that isolated just a purely mental event. And so that's one example of an inner world influencing gene expression. We move more into kind of the frontier of it in terms of getting more into the vibes. There is clear research showing that our heart produces an electromagnetic field. I mean, much of our body does. The brain does. Anywhere there's circulating electricity, you're going to have electric field. The brain has a pretty strong EMF, but the heart is the strongest in our body. And research at the Heart Math Institute, Roland McCready, shows that the EMF field is kind of like a toroid donut that goes about 3 feet out from our body. But one of the most interesting things they've shown is that the kind of the signature of that EMF field, it changes with emotional states. They looked just basically comparing feelings of gratitude, kind of meditating on gratitude versus being angry. And it changes the EMF field. You can literally measure changes in the way this field, the frequencies and the squiggly lines and all that. So you take that, and then it's very well known, transcription factors like heat shock proteins, they can be regulated by EMFs. And the level, so this hasn't been demonstrated directly. I'm just telling you kind of the frontier of it. But you got A goes to B and B goes to C. The type of like the microtesla level EMFs can change transcription factors. Heart EMF is in microtesla range. So the kind of the A goes to C is you regulate your emotional state. You can conceivably regulate transcription factors that would have these cascading effects in terms of what's going on in your body. Does that sound too far of a stretch to you?
No, I was having this conversation just last weekend with my sister, like, because like this idea of coherence, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, are these the pioneers, the folks who founded the Heart Math Institute, or was it before then?
It was, yeah, heart math.
Yeah. And yeah, just this, so exactly those things is the idea that when your heart's out of alignment,
Mhm.
you know, the the mind is out of alignment, and you get into this negative feedback loop. And a lot of these like autoimmune inflammatory initiatives is, having, heart out of alignment with, where you want to be. And I suppose like, I think out of alignment with what you know is good. See, like now we're on kind of the edge of the divine, right? So like, well, why didn't I do that fully? Well, my heart wasn't in it. Well, why wasn't my heart in it? Well, I didn't believe it. Well, what exactly didn't you believe? Right. So like to me, there's this, like, there is a question of, are there universal truths? Right. I mean, I suppose we don't need to answer that for this level of objectivity, right? Because basically what we're saying is, hey, I can show you that if you think about this thing, there's a profound change in your endocrinology, in the cascade of hormones that you produce that create a downstream effect of changing in the gene expression profile, which literally changes to a structural transformation of your physicality. So it's going from, the space between an idea and matter. So like a thought can actually be made manifest, real, right? Like an actual tangible thing. So I think like maybe the first step is for listeners coming to terms with that as something that is possible. And I mean, this is an idea that I've been, fascinated with myself, for myself as an athlete, right? Because it literally does start with like the idea, the vision of a future self. And like certainly you need to take all of the actions, towards that outcome. But basically what we're saying is, before you see the crystallization of the outcome, which is hard to
Yeah.
say exactly when that manifests, because there's a whole kind of quorum of structures that need to come together to run the result that you were chasing, right? But all along the way, there are these hidden progressions and steps and missteps that are happening at the level of your coherence. And I think that's why maybe this received so much early adoption by athletes, right?
Mhm.
Because they really are going after a faith-based life, right? They're going after, so when I say faith, I mean belief in the unseen, right? It's like this future state, this vision that I have for myself, I believe that I can do it, but I can't see it. And so, and I mean, again, I did see a lot of the early adopters of the heart math by athletes. I did see it actually between, in the equestrian sport, is actually the riders and the horses as well, like actually looking for the coherence between the two. And so just to, like, I've experienced that, and so I've experienced the positive and the negative, right? So in insofar as you can create a lucid experience by, requesting it, praying for it, meditating for it. I don't know what the right language is, but the opposite is true also. And the well, it's exactly as you said. It's like the idea, a false idea, a false truth put in your mind has drastic and dramatic outcomes. So be careful. And so is that really what this course is helping you do? Is like, hey, here's what you can put in, but also watch out for all these other things, that could actually be the source of something that is more psychosomatic than you thought, and so therefore more in your control. And in this instance, I'm referring to, would you consider him a pioneer? The what's his name? Not Potenza. Is it Potenza? The heart,
Joe
the
Dispenza?
Dispenza, not
Joe
Potenza. Yeah,
Dispenza, yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, he talked about rebuilding his whole spinal cord or something. I mean, I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, and he's got a great following, and so is that what this course is? Is it a map to that kind of practical application or implementation of this
It
inward looking?
is. Yeah, it is. And
Yeah.
and with the emphasis on you getting feedback from yourself so that you can have the experience yourself and
Right.
gain confidence. By the way, we did a gene expression study with folks in a workshop with Joe Dispenza before and after, and so lots of gene changes. But again, a lot going on there, so that's not definitive
Right.
demonstration. I'm curious, you mentioned about this thought being manifest and in athletics. I just wonder if you, and I've heard about this subtle difference between how you think about that. I try to say it clearly, the difference between saying like looking toward a future state versus like I am a fit person, getting, thinking of yourself in that way, kind of more in a now space rather than looking to the future. I don't know if you experienced that or talk about that in your coaching, and because I imagine it would be fun one day to look at that, you know, in a
Mm,
experimental setting, but
yeah,
in the ways, just experienced. Do you notice that difference? Is that something that can be more
yeah.
effective?
I'm glad you caught that. That's it's a good point to pull out, and I'll answer it with a result N of one. So take it with a grain of salt. But I was working toward that aim of being a sprinter, being a track athlete, and then I was a walk-on track athlete. So this is my third year at university. I'm like barely on the university team, and yeah, I'm ranked like 700th in the country for my event, which is it's not great. It's like above middle of the pack. At the time, I was racing in the 60 meters. So that's the event that everybody does, right? Everybody runs a 60. So there's like thousands upon thousands of people. I'm ranked like 700. So I'm okay. Well, I'm a bottom tier athlete, barely hanging on the team. And then I met this coach, Coach Garrett Ross, guy who changed my life. He was a polymath, also happened to be this like Trinidadian sprint guru, like had a track record of performance, worked with a lot of the world class athletes, Canadian sprinters, and he just had a way of communicating the potential, right? And not necessarily potential that need to be 5 or 10 years out, but like the potential now. And so he had a combination of words and he had a combination of actions such that in 3 months, I went being ranked 700th in the country to seventh in the country.
Holy shit!
Yeah. Yeah. And he was trained as a geologist, and he was he ended up being a high school teacher. But then once he was retired, he went back to university, and he studied psychology and kinesiology and computer science. And so by the time I met him, he's like retired for 20 years and doing all these things, and but still loved sprinting. And he just became a lifelong friend, right? Like everything that he taught me was sure, like it took me from being essentially bottom of the pack to making the national final, going so far as the Olympic trials, being the team captain, being an academic all Canadian, and it literally did happen like on a day. Now I still had to do all those other things.
Yeah.
It isn't just like wish it, want it, will it. It's not.
Right.
You just had to do all the work, and there was a commitment, but it was so effective. And suffice to say, like when I took what I learned about sprinting, it was something that every speed power athlete wanted to learn. So I brought it to like a lot of professional athletes, like hockey players, football players, basketball. And what I would say is, hey, so we don't have to do all these sprints, we don't have to do all these weights, because really the speed of contraction, you already have it. What we really need to do is we need to put the body in the place to actualize it. And the way your body does that is unique to you. And so we need to find that, right? It's like it's like as tricky as finding out how to swim for the first time or ride a bike for the first time.
Mm.
But, once you've got it, you've got it.
Yeah.
But so yeah, to your point, I think the vision kind of creates a healthy tension in creating, a goal. And so I've come to modify how I think about goal setting, and like, how do you find the healthy tension? And what I mean by health, I'll explain healthy tension by giving an example of unhealthy tension. If you take the single point, you break it into two. The first point is where you are, and the second point is where you want to be. And imagine it. There's like a cord, but imagine that cord has the property of chewing gum. It's like once you go too far, then it like falls into impossibility. And so I think like the tension and the desire is important to drive the selection of the input. But I do think that if you have the right input, the results can, in some instance, be instantaneous, if that answers your question. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. And I
Mhm.
like, you're talking about you got to find it's going to be unique to every person. You got to find it. actually something, again, that's in the course in terms of finding your energy, being able to connect with your energy body. And in the scientific spirit, there's basically a self test. I could send you a little video link if anybody wants. Kind of funny, kind of hokey, where I describe it. You didn't need to get the course just to do the self test to feel to know that you're connected with your energy body. And it's very basically simple. And this is one of the things that I thought was so fascinating in understanding the power of this is the test is you put your hands together and you line up your fingers. You've marked the bottom of your thumb pad so that you can bring it together again in the same way after. It's a pre-post test. So you got them lined up. And then you put them down and then you do basically your whatever you need to do, whatever meditation you fits for you to quiet your mind, to set up the monkey mind. Do that until you feel like you're settled. And then you just imagine that you're sending your energy to one of your hands, heating it up, imagine it getting red hot, on fire, red hot, blue hot, whatever. It's just you stick it in lava. Do it for like 30 seconds, and then open your eyes, line your thumb pads back up again with that line. And then you'll see the hand you're imagining is bigger. And it doesn't have to be, you don't think esoteric, it's just microcirculation. And you've expanded your hand.
Yeah.
But just think about that. Something in your mind, your attention can direct the blood flow in your body. The implications of that, you can kind of go the medical route is microcirculation. Lack of microcirculation is at the basis of almost all disease.
Mhm.
And then you can go the esoteric route. Well, okay, if this is chi, whatever it is, basically it's mind body influence. And this is what I love about it is you can just test it for yourself. And you can if you want to be, you could try to get better at it, do it faster. That's not, that could be fun too. But just the basic rudimentary thing is you can rely on yourself to know, okay, yes, I have connected with my body, whether you think of it as chi or energy or microcirculation, but it's a real test. You can feel it yourself, and then and then once you have that knowledge, once you have that confidence, I think that's where you can grow from that.
As you say that, I think about Garnett's, go-to workout. Garnett was my coach, and it was 20 times 100, but not done in the way that you would think. Like you would start by walking, right? Walk 100 meters and count your strides, and then tell me how you feel,
Mm.
right? Walk a little faster, try to keep the effort the same as the first walk, and then tell me how you feel. And on and on and on until you're sprinting full speed and you've run a time you've never run in your life,
Wow.
right? Because at every point in time you would feel the power, right, of the concentric movement that's actually moving you toward the goal, and then you feel the antagonistic muscles actually blocking you, and you would learn the subtleties, and you would learn,
Wow.
what the 10,000 hour rule through trial and error would suggest is, well, you get there by trial and error, and you learn the perfect balance of what's required for that effort. But I think that through this methodology that Garnett developed is you could get there systematically by involving the mind in, this, kinesthetic awareness, so that like all the track and field drills for activation were still on the menu,
Yeah.
but the menu is not the meal, and the meal became what the situation called for. And every day was kind of different because it depended on like, hey, did I sleep on the wrong side, or did I get in a fight with my girlfriend, or did I eat some bad chili? Like, I don't know. Like that's kind of the spaces and places, element. So, you are not the same. And so what's required is not the same. And I think that's a challenge, right? Is like by today's, kind of health and wellness and longevity. It's like, what's the hack? What's the cold tub? What's the Wim Hof breathing? What's the, intermittent fasting, the keto diet? And it's like, those are all programs, that you're unknowingly putting in, as we kind of alluded to at the beginning, is like the programs are certainly words and ideas, but even like the actions come with their consequences as well. But upstream from that is the idea that you're buying. So you know, the I guess the challenge is like like the externalization of it, right? So
Mm.
because it would be tempting to go through this course and then I would know how to do it, right? Let's say I would come out the other end and I would be more tuned. But then if I told you my playbook and you try to use my playbook, it's not going to work. Like you have to
Yeah.
find your playbook, and that's not like we're not primed for that today. We're kind of primed for like just give me the answer. And it sounds to me like the
Yeah.
kind of intentionality that you're talking to does require that quieting of the mind. Like even just sit down for 30 seconds and imagine, do your meditation, whatever that is. And you'll see your hand. It's like, well, do I have the 30 seconds? Do I have the discipline to do that? Or do I want to pick up my phone? Right.
Right.
So maybe like just some specifics on the course, like how long is it? How much is it? Where do people find it? Because I do want to, do a write up on, I know there's some content that you gave me that I'll dive into more systematically, but we talked about the kind of parts of the book. Like, is there like so you can break down the course into like three parts, and how long does it take? Is there a community? Or do you imagine setting up a retreat associated with this? Yeah, I'd love to know where it is today and where you see it going in the future.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll give you a link. People can just go to the link and find the course. It's designed again. It's really for beginners who want to learn about this and experience it. So there's basically 8 modules. Each module is takes about an hour, depending how fast you go through it. There are a couple of two bonus modules, so there's actually 10 in total. The first 8 are the much, they were kind of the systematic class on building your ability to feel vibes in the environment and places, spaces, and practices to go through. The bonus modules are kind of the more off the cuff fun ones. The one is all about haunted houses, the science behind
Right.
houses. It was similar in the book. And then the last bonus one is something that I really couldn't do with the publisher, is veer outside of the strictly scientific realm. Last chapter looks at esoteric traditions and how that maps onto now quantum physics and what we've learned. And
Wow.
it's really fun. It's a more kind of, letting loose a bit. It's like a bonus. And there's a experiential for that one as well. Kind of gets to go off in that mystical realm. So that's real fun too. So I would definitely suggest sticking around for the bonuses. But it's designed to be at self-paced. You go, it's online. Some of the experientials on camera. Some of them we just talk through it. It's slow and fun.
Amazing. So yeah, I'll certainly put those details in the show notes and the companion piece that I put together, and would love to do it myself. And I can think of a handful of people who would love this. A lot of them athletes, a lot of them entrepreneurs, a lot of them parents for sure. So coming back to what we had discussed ahead of our call today was I promised you I was going to ask 3 questions, right? So
Mm.
I'll give them to you straight, the 3, and you can answer them in any order you like. Number 1, if this was your last podcast, what would the final song be? What would be the idea that you would want to convey? And number 2, who would need to hear it? And then number 3 is who would you nominate for my next guest?
Okay, I'll nominate first. I would love to hear you talking with Bruce Damer, the Damer. He's an astrobiologist and origin of life guy. Very
Game on.
interesting dude. He was at NASA Ames and UCSC. He's got this hot springs hypothesis about how the cycling pools on early Earth could create the conditions for polymers of RNA and then DNA to form and encapsulated into protocells. Very cool conversation. And I also like that he kind of applies that, think about how these same principles could guide how we search for extraterrestrial life.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
fascinating guy.
Mhm.
My main message I could just send out to the world, my last, would be, you know, what we spoke about today. Our mind is constantly in conversation with our genes. I think this is the critical turning point we need to survive as a human race. Is what our challenge is. And that, as we spoke about, that dialogue can heal or harm. And much of this is happening below our awareness unless we bring it up. So probably the most radical act of self-care may be to choose who and what is programming our biology. And sitting here today, I would want to say this to a teenager scrolling on their phone for hours. They're constantly being programmed by outside forces, and these forces are driven by economics, not human thriving. That's not the goal, most of it. And I just want them to understand, when your mind is focused and pulled outward and fragmented like this, you're losing touch with your own internal signals, the body's subtle feedback, which is what we need to keep grounded and healthy. So, the more disembodied your attention becomes, the weaker this collaboration is with your biology. So, reclaiming that connection is how we regain agency in shaping not just our emotional state, but our physical state.
Amazing. Garrett, I had another question about the colloquium that I want to follow up with you on at a later date. So, and that's because what I want to do is I want to take the course for myself, right? And because I think my question would be much more intelligent. But for listeners, the idea is, in case I haven't said this before, I really started this podcast really because I was called to. You talk about economic drivers. There was no economic driver. It was just, hey, just do 100 episodes and see. And we're approaching that 100th episode very soon, and I've had incredible conversations along the way. And one of the ideas that has come out of this is like, hey, what if I got a few of these people in one place? What kinds of synergies, what kind of better intentional future towards this transhumanism idea that we're talking about, might we get to together better, faster, instantly, as it were, by changing our thoughts. And I think a lot of the times that we don't move fast, this is me speaking as an entrepreneur who learned business by the school of hard knocks, is it's not easy to bring a product to market. And a lot of that has to do with many, well, simply put, competing stakeholders that you're trying to appease, and doing so out of sequence gets in the way. And so, but at the end of the day, I think the simplest service is there's one service, there's one servant capability, and then there's one need, and that's the perfect product market fit, right? And so if you're doing that at the micro scale over and over and over again and spiraling it from that intention, I think you can get to a point where the business of the precision and the personalization is a better word. Personalization is possible, and in fact, I think the success of business is, sure, it's dependent on treating everybody the same, but the way you treat everybody the same is by treating each person differently. And so that's kind of the spirit that I'm imagining, top minds in terms of folks who see the world in terms of the molecules or the mystery, but also the people who see it, digitally and mechanically. And, is there a confluence there, where our humanity is, and preserved isn't the right word, but maybe it's discovered and amplified, discovered for what it truly is, and amplified in terms of, well, consciousness is certainly a part of it. So anyway, I want to follow up with that. We're definitely, this was our round 2. It looks like round 3 is inevitable. All right. As we close out this discussion with Dr. Garrett Yount, one truth feels impossible to ignore: consciousness is not an observer. It seems to be a participant. Now, the thread he helps us trace is one that connects inner stillness to outer change, measurement to meaning, and science to the sacred. Whether you call it chi, coherence, or biofield, the real discovery is the dialogue between body, mind, and the unseen intelligence that animates both. In a world obsessed with external technology, Yount reminds us that the most transformative innovation may still lie within. That is, the capacity to shape biology through awareness. The invitation then is simple: follow the thread, test it in your own life, because the future of health, healing, and human potential may depend on our willingness to see consciousness not as an abstraction, but as the most essential data of all.